AdvoKAYte, holding healthcare accountable. This podcast is my way of sharing what I've learned about the mistakes, the cover-ups, and the ways we can all protect ourselves. We're all in this together. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of AdvoKAYte, holding healthcare accountable. I'm delighted today to have back with me as my guest, Kalee Pair. Welcome back, Kalee.
Thank you for having me. I've been with you since the first episode of season 1. Wow.
Seems like yesterday, and here we are midway through season 2.
I know, and it's crazy to think, when I interviewed you for this first episode talking about why you wanted to even do the podcast, I have learned by going on this journey with you on so many things that I would never even have thought of or couldn't believe happened or everything. So I do think that there's so much good material here that I wanted to talk more deeply about certain things and highlight different episodes. So I would love to do this more often, but I want to talk about why, even though the eyes have been open when we're listening to these episodes, and if you haven't yet, you need to listen to these episodes, go back to season 1, but why do medical errors keep happening? And I do think one of the most eye-opening episodes that you've had so far in both seasons was with Dr. Matt Austin. I want, for those who haven't listened to the episode yet, who is he and why is his perspective so important?
Well, first off, I want to say this is kind of fun because I'm listed as the host, but we're actually kind of turning the tables. And you're just going to put me on the hot seat, and who knows what could get me talking, who knows what could happen here. But I also think it's important because the questions that you have are the questions that probably a lot of people who listen have. And it's always a reminder, you're a patient, everybody you love is a patient. So these are the kind of questions I want to receive because I can talk about all kinds of things. But if it doesn't really matter to people and doesn't really resonate with people who are on the front lines of going to their doctors, having to be admitted to a hospital, the things that keep them awake at night, that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So,
I want to start. There's one clip that we're going to show today from your episode with him that I think I want to jump to it because it's so powerful. So we're going to do that. Brenna, we're going to jump to the clip that is number 2. So just jump to that. But I want Matt put this in a way that I feel was the highlight of why you're doing this podcast to begin with. So can we go ahead and listen to that?
The analogy that gets made a lot is, we have the equivalent of 3 747s crashing every day as a result of patient harm in the U.S. healthcare system. And what people would say is if that was happening in our aviation system, we would be doing a whole lot to understand what was happening, why that was happening, and what we would do differently.
What?
Well, think about boarding an airplane and how irritating it is when they say the faucet in the bathroom isn't working and we're going to be grounded for an hour because they have to go through their complete checklist to make sure that the faucet is fixed or some minor screw is missing or something like that. In the airline industry, there's not external pressures to say, hey, we've got investors that we got to keep happy. We got to report to the board of directors. We got to hit our profit margins. We got to push these planes through, so we're going to go on up. We don't have time to repair that, which could be a minor thing or a major thing, putting all of the passengers on board at risk. It would not happen in the airline industry because the industry itself has pioneered in many ways safety systems and made safety a culture where everyone is a part of safety first. And that's why we don't have 2 or 3 jumbo jets dropping out of the sky every day. If we did, people wouldn't fly. Oftentimes, people don't have a choice about whether to seek health care. They usually don't. People have a choice about whether to fly or not. I'll say one other thing, which is that the people flying the plane have a vested interest in the plane not crashing. because they
Yeah.
die too. And that is not true for the healthcare industry.
So it really sets it up to show that flying is safer than going to the hospital? Is that what is basically being said here?
Well, I think the point is that the healthcare system has had this mindset. And how do I know that? Because of taking thousands of depositions, trying hundreds of cases, and understanding their mindset. And their mindset is, we have human beings performing healthcare, and humans make errors. Human error is inevitable. That is not true. I mean, pilots are humans, airplane
That's what I was just gonna
mechanics are
say.
humans, and error is not inevitable. But no one is forcing the healthcare industry to challenge them and say, that's wrong, and we don't accept it. And like I say, if 3 planes per day were falling out of the sky, the FAA would come in, there would be a congressional investigation, planes would be grounded until the problem was worked out. But in medicine, 300 or 1,000 people don't die at once. And it doesn't make the nightly news most of the time. And there's certainly never a congressional investigation. These cases happen one at a time, and they're fought out in courtrooms across the country. Sometimes there's no patient safety czar. There's no FAA equivalent for hospitals that swoop in and get the black box and make the investigation. So, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, I think looking at it with that perspective is what's really eye-opening. Is like, yes, okay, you have to go. If you're sick, you have nowhere else to go. You've got to go to the hospital, and the stuff's just not in place the way it was before, or where it is for other industries, like the airline industry. Matt also introduced a concept called the Swiss cheese model, which I love Swiss cheese, but like, I wanted you to explain this, of what it actually meant, and we have a clip of him talking about it, so if we could throw that one up there, Brenna. That's the third clip.
What we often talk about in this space too is something called the Swiss cheese model, which is where, there may be a little bit of a safety gap in one process, and another safety gap in another process, and another safety gap in another process. And it just happens that those 3 all lined up. Right. So in most days, one of those 3s would have caught it. Right. But there may have been a particular situation or circumstance in which all of those line up, and you're able to sort of go through the Swiss cheese.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. Sometimes it's just one hole. See that all the time. We're so about the root cause of a preventable medical error. And it's actually shocking sometimes how simple the cause of the error was that creates a catastrophic injury or a death. It could be this person handed this patient off to that person, and they didn't tell them something that they needed to know, and then that got carried on. But oftentimes it is like the Swiss cheese, which is, if you think about the holes in the Swiss cheese, they don't usually, when they come out of the package, I'm a big Swiss cheese fan myself.
No, I'm hungry.
The holes don't line up. But if you were to take those slices and line them all up, that's where the patient falls through the hole.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, errors are compounded on top of one another. And it's actually fascinating to see and understand, well, where did this problem originate? Well, this doctor had a cognitive bias and didn't rule out what was really wrong with the patient that ended up killing the patient. And then the second layer of Swiss cheese, the second doctor or whatever, took that for granted and didn't do their own original thinking. And, just thousands of things like that.
And we've talked about discussing this is going to go off the rails a little bit, which happens sometimes with me. But we've talked about the show The Pit, and how that happens constantly in that show.
Yeah. I would never watch a lawyer show or, like people are like, oh, you must watch, NCIS or whatever. And I was like, oh, no way, But give me a good medical show. And I loved The Pit. And I want to go back through each episode of The Pit and really talk about what was actually going on there, because they did a great job of identifying, like, yeah, these are real issues in healthcare. So, and they made it really entertaining.
Yeah, we're gonna make sure that we do that at some point. And there's been so much that, I do think with comments that we've seen from the podcast, people are learning a lot on this journey of AdvoKAYte. But I want to ask you what you've learned. What have you learned so far on what direction you would like the podcast to go? Are you getting any feedback? Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I am not a professional podcaster. I believe it or not, I felt like after 40 years or so, we're not counting, practicing law and representing victims, that I had some things to say. And I really just was becoming so exasperated. And I felt like, well, maybe no one will care, maybe no one will listen, but I feel like I need to tell people what they need to know. And I've been really surprised and pleased with the feedback. Like, I go places and people say, oh, I heard your podcast or whatever. I think something about me is that I am someone who's always striving to do better at whatever I do. I don't want to do anything half-aid, Mm-hmm. And so I know my tendency would be to nerd out on issues and get a lot of experts and go deep into root cause or preventable medical errors and, engineering systems and this, that, and the other. But what I've learned is I want to talk about what people want to hear about. I hardly go anywhere where somebody doesn't say, oh, you're a medical malpractice lawyer? Let me tell you what happened to my Aunt Susie. Or, hey, let me tell you what happened to my brother Don. Everybody wants to talk about healthcare right now. Everyone seems to be concerned about healthcare these days. So
we really want to, what Kay's trying to say is she wants to hear from, you want to hear from people. Like,
I do.
You're doing the podcast for a reason, because you have a lot to say over the 40 years of experience that you have, but also you want people to feel heard and can advocate for themselves. And this is the place to do it, AdvoKAYte.
I want to hear from people what they want to know. And I also want to get people to get energized and do something about this. Because I'm just one little voice out there. And if we're going to make the changes that need to be made, we're going to have to get a whole lot of voices who care about this deeply.
So if people want to reach out, AdvoKAYte's on all of the different podcast platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Send a message that way. Let us know, let you know, so that we can address anything that they might have in the future.
Yes, and I want to be really clear about something, because this is not, yes, I am a practicing medical malpractice lawyer. Luke and I have a medical malpractice law firm. We represent patients. We and other medical malpractice lawyers are only able to file medical malpractice lawsuits on behalf of a tiny fraction of people who had a bad experience, who were malpracticed upon, and had a minor injury, or where maybe there was an error, but it's a little bit ambiguous about whether that error was preventable or not. So I don't want to tell everybody to contact me and tell me what happened to them and then be mad at me because I didn't take their case. And I'm just laying it out there. I'm at an age and a stage in my practice where I want to make it very clear I'm not out here doing this so that I can underhandedly say, call me if you believe you were the victim of a medical error. This is not what this podcast is about. What I want to hear about is, I do want to hear what's happened to people, with the expectation that we want to expose why it happened, how it could be prevented, how we could help the next person from being spared.